Have you ever wondered where the line is between a casual chat with a police officer and something more? Well, today we're diving into R.V. Grant, a huge Supreme Court case here in Canada that completely redrew that line. And believe it or not, it all started with one man, just walking down the street. So let's set the scene. It's November 2003, in Toronto. Police are patrolling an area they call high crime when they see a young black man, Donahue Grant. They later said he kind of stared at them, and that was enough to pique their interest. So a uniformed officer gets out, stands right in Mr. Grant's path, and says he wants to have a chat. A moment later, two more officers, these ones in plain clothes, show up and pretty much block him in. That's when the first officer asks a very direct question. Do you have anything on you that you shouldn't? And Mr. Grant's answer changes everything. Just like that, Mr. Grant is arrested. The police search him and find a loaded revolver. Now you'd think that's case closed, right? Well, not exactly. That gun became the absolute centerpiece of the case against him, but its discovery also kicked off this massive legal battle that went all the way to the top. And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Just because you find something doesn't automatically mean it's fair game in court. This whole situation created two huge legal puzzles that the Supreme Court had to solve. Okay, puzzle number one. At what exact moment was Mr. Grant no longer free to just walk away? Because the second that happens, it's a detention, and a whole bunch of rights under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms suddenly kick in. And puzzle number two, if his rights were violated, what on earth do you do with the gun? Do you toss out this incredibly reliable piece of evidence to send a message about protecting rights? Or do you let it in because, hey, it's a loaded gun? All right, let's dig into that first problem, detention. You see, before this case, the legal definition was, well, kind of messy. It was really hard for courts to figure out when these quick street encounters crossed the line. The Supreme Court knew they had to come up with something clearer. And what they came up with was this idea of psychological detention. This is a game changer. It's not about being in handcuffs or locked in a room. It's about a feeling. The test is, would a reasonable person in that exact same situation feel like they had to stay and do what the police were telling them? If you feel like you can't leave, then legally speaking, you're being detained. So using this new lens, the court looked back at the encounter and pinpointed the exact moment the chat turned into a detention. It wasn't when they formally arrested him. No, it was the second those officers blocked his way and instructed him to keep his hands visible. At that point, the court said, any reasonable person would have concluded they were not free to just walk away. And here's the kicker. Since he was detained, the police needed a valid legal reason for it. But as the court's majority opinion makes crystal clear, they had nothing. No tip, no report of a crime, not a single piece of information linking Mr. Grant to anything illegal. That made the detention arbitrary, basically random, and a violation of his Section 9 charter rights. But wait, there's a really important layer to this. While most of the justices agreed, one of them felt that a critical piece of the context was being left out of the conversation. Justice Binney wrote a separate opinion to make this point loud and clear. He argued that you can't just apply a generic, reasonable person test without considering real-world factors, like race. He stated that for a visible minority, that feeling of not being able to walk away from police can be way more intense. It's a reality, he said, that the justice system simply can't afford to ignore. Okay, so it's settled. Mr. Grant's rights were violated. Period. That brings us right back to our second puzzle. What about the gun? It was found as a direct result of that illegal detention. So, does it get tossed out of court? To figure this out, the Supreme Court basically threw out the old rulebook. The old test was really rigid. It was almost black and white. If the evidence was obtained in a certain way, it was pretty much automatically excluded. The court replaced it with a brand new, much more flexible three-part balancing act, now famously known as the Grant test. This new test is all about weighing three things. First, how serious was the police misconduct? Was it a simple mistake made in a confusing situation? Or did they knowingly trample on someone's rights? Second, what was the impact on the person? Was it a small inconvenience or a major violation of their liberty and privacy? And third, what about society's interest? How important is the evidence to getting a conviction for a serious crime? So, how did this brand new test work when the court applied it to the facts of Mr. Grant's case? Let's see how they balance the scales of justice. All right, here's the scorecard. For the first factor, the seriousness of the police conduct, the court actually went easy on them. They said that since the law on detention was so unclear back then, it was an understandable error. But on the second factor, the impact on Mr. Grant, that was huge. His freedom was taken away, and he was basically tricked into incriminating himself without a lawyer. And finally, the third factor, society's interest, was also sky high. We're talking about a loaded firearm, which is reliable evidence in a very serious public safety matter. So you have one big factor weighing in favor of throwing the evidence out and two big factors weighing in favor of keeping it in. After balancing it all, the Supreme Court made a tough call, admitting the gun into evidence they said would do less harm to the long-term reputation of the justice system than excluding it. The gun was in. And that leads us to the final outcome. With the gun officially part of the case, what happened to Mr. Grant? And maybe more importantly, what's the lasting legacy of this whole thing? The final result is actually pretty surprising. For the most serious charge, weapons trafficking, Mr. Grant was acquitted. The Supreme Court looked at the law and decided that trafficking means you have to transfer the weapon to another person, not just carry it yourself. But because the gun was admitted into evidence, his convictions on the other firearms charges were upheld. So why does any of this matter to you? Well, the Grant case literally sets the ground rules for police encounters on the street. It draws a clear line in the sand between a chat and a detention, which is when your rights, like the right to a lawyer, kick in. It protects all of us by saying police can't just detain you on a vague hunch. And it created the modern balancing test that our courts still use every single day. Which leaves us with one final question to think about, one that brings the whole case full circle. Knowing what you know now, the next time you see a police officer approach, would you feel, truly, that you were free to walk away?